All right. Well, hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me. My name is Jason Levine. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. And today it's great to be back here with the video masterclass talking about color grading. And this is part 2 of our Intro to Color Grading class here on Behance. And if you're watching on YouTube as well, hello. Thank you so much for joining. And this is a continuation of last week's stream. So we're going to kind of pick up where we left off and continue covering a couple of things that we were talking about inside of the Selective Color Curves. One or two additional tips in the basic corrections panel. We'll segue over to the color wheels and match panel, which, if you're a beginner especially, is probably one of the coolest and easiest ways to start building looks for your videos directly inside of Premiere Pro with minimal effort. And again, you can kind of learn as you go. We'll talk a bit about HSLs, hue, saturation, luminance, and using these as secondary color correction tools, the native vignette, and then we'll close it off with using adjustment layers to give everything an overall look. So as always, thank you so much for joining. Of course, we've got our live interactive chat, and unlike my weekly streams, or I should say daily streams, this is going to be more interactive. That's the theme of this masterclass. So I've got your live chat in front of me here on Behance. That's where the conversation is happening, so thank you so much. And we've got some of our great, fantastic mods in here. We've got Paco, we've got Tim, we've got Jan Eric. So hello to everyone. Thank you so much for joining. And I've got a lot of stuff to cover as always. So let's go ahead and kick right into it. And we're going to get started here. And then following me, we've got my colleague Howard, who will be working on some XD stuff. So can't wait to send you guys over to Howard. Okay, so let's go ahead and switch over. All right, so as promised, we're actually going to start here back in the basic corrections panel. And if you recall, as I was telling you last week, the basic correction panel in particular inside of Lumetri Color is essentially a reimagined version for video of the Lightroom Develop module. And it has essentially all of the same controls, or at least most of all of the same controls, including things like temperature, tint, and then all of your various tone controls, exposure, contrast, highlight, shadow, white, black, and saturation. One thing that I neglected to show, because I figured you might play around with this and maybe you'll get inspired to check and play around, was the actual white balance eyedropper. Right? So while you have manual controls for setting white balance under the white balance dropdown, and by the way, all of these little sections, these are little twirl downs. These can be minimized for, visual accommodation of making all the screen real estate that you need. But we've got the white balance eyedropper in there. So I just wanted to point this out. Everyone knows how this works, but this is one of those things I didn't call it out specifically and wanted to make sure that everybody knew that it was in there. So here we have a piece of footage. And as you can see, it is decidedly green. This was how it was captured live, and we just need to re-white balance this shot. Now again, as a non-colorist myself, I could spend a lot of time trying to work the temperature and tint to make it look better, and maybe it wouldn't take too long, but we know there's a better way. So if we simply click on our standard white balance eyedropper, found right here under white balance, I happen to know that the shoe right here, this is white, or obviously you want sort of a neutral whitish light gray here. Go ahead and click on this, and in a single click, it just restores the white balance to the way it looks. Don't forget that we've got our toggle for bypassing all of the modules inside of Lumetri. So we can turn this off. There's the before, there's the after, play the footage, and very nicely, we've got a perfectly white balance shot here with a single click. We didn't have that white balance eyedropper for a couple of versions of Lumetri, so it's great to be able to showcase this now because this is something that you're pretty much going to probably use all the time. All right, so just a couple of quick hellos before we get moving here. We've got Desiree and we've got Ang. We've got a couple other people over here watching. Thank you so much for joining. Okay, so we're going to click over to curves. And last week we left off. We started with hue versus sat, which again, for just a quick refresher here, allows you to adjust the saturation of a particular hue inside of your video. Then we went to hue versus hue, which again allows you to basically recolor or adjust the color of a particular hue. So, there were certain instances where we changed lips or lipstick from red to green, and I had some buttons on one of my analog synths. We changed that from red to purple or something like that. It allows you to adjust the hue of an existing hue. And then, of course, we have hue versus Luma, and this is where we're going to start today. Now, these start to get a little more complex as you move down through these different curves. Today, we're only going to cover hue versus Luma and hue versus sat, or sorry, Luma versus sat. Now, there is one additional one here, sat versus sat. This is super complex. This is not going to be found in an intro to color grading. It's primarily for broadcast applications. We're not going to go there today. Very unlikely that most of you will need to use this right away. Of course, you can always check out additional videos that I have online. And if you're really looking for deep color knowledge, I highly recommend checking out videos from some of my esteemed colleagues in the field. Simon Walker is one. You may know him if you follow Red Giant. He's done a ton of tutorials for them. He's a fantastic resource, and he is really a color master. There's also Robbie Carman, C-A-R-M-A-N, very, very famous, very, very well known in the color world. Aaron Rabinowitz is another. A lot of the folks from Red Giant, of course. You've got Stu Maschwitz with all of his blogs and everything else. Lots of resources out there if you really want to get deep beyond this intro step to Lumetri Color and Premiere. Okay, so much like hue versus sat and hue versus hue, the whole concept with hue versus Luma is that you are adjusting the luminance value, the brightness contrast, effectively, of an existing hue. So in this particular shot here, we have this kind of flat looking image. I mean, there's some color. You can see we've got some brownish mountains in the back there, and you can see sort of the brownish beige horses, and you can see a little bit of the blue sky reflecting in the foreground here. But we basically wanted to take the brightness of that blue and not just make it more blue, but adjust the luminance. So we wanted to add a little bit of drama. So to do that, we're going to darken the brightness of that blue. And to do that, to add that kind of look, that kind of effect, that is specifically what hue versus Luma is for. So just as with the other examples that we showed, you've got the eyedropper here that allows you to make your selections. So let's go ahead and select our eyedropper. And we're going to come up to the blue right here and make a selection. And just as with the others, as we saw last week, and here I'm just going to scroll this up so we can kind of do side by side. Let's see if I can get all of the blue in there. Yeah, that's pretty good. I'm not in the way. Okay. And we've got our, oh, whoops. Gotta be careful as I move my mouse over. We've got our 3 control points. Let's see how many times I do that. All right. So now, once again, if you hold down the Shift key, this will constrain the movement to pure vertical so that you won't be able to move laterally. That'll keep it in that exact hue of blue, right? And you can always move it after the fact. So I'm going to hold down Shift to constrain. I'll click on my center point, and once again, just brilliant UI design here. As we go above the line or move north of the line, you can see that it's going to brighten the luminance, right? You can see it's going from blue to white. So just to kind of show you, if we were to do that, you can see that the blue area is getting, whiter, effectively kind of blowing it out. That is not what we want. We want to darken it, which will also subsequently darken the blue reflection in the water there to give us a bit more drama. So we're going to drag this below the line, as you can see, as it moved towards black. And just like that, we can start to add some really nice dramatic blue sky in there, okay? Now, as I mentioned last week, this is a proxy, so that's why you're seeing a little bit of pixelation there. You wouldn't normally see that, okay? And you may not even be seeing it over the stream for all I know. Of course, we can go completely extreme, but you're going to see this starting to look very artifacted here. But you get the idea. Brighten, north, darken, south. Very, very simple. And with just really a single click there, now we've got this kind of slightly more dramatic looking scene as our horses go in slow motion crossing the river here. All right, so that is hue versus Luma. Now, similarly, we also have the option here, if we wanted to affect the luminance values of the clouds as well. So remember, you can have multiple control points, multiple hues that are being affected inside each of these selective color curve modules. So I could make a selection here. Let's come up to one of the brighter clouds, something like that, okay? And then again, do the same sort of thing. Maybe just darken those ever so slightly to just add a little bit of drama and some of those warmer tones. You can see it really affecting some of the shadows of the clouds down below. And it just makes it a little bit more dramatic. You can, of course, before, after by clicking on and off the modules here. All right. And it's just a really nice, effective way to work with this tool. This was one of those that I thought, you know, I don't know if I'm going to use this one so much. But if you've got stuff that, again, where you're not so much wanting to affect saturation or color, but just the overall brightness, the light of that particular hue, this is incredibly useful. It's also very useful if you're trying to balance your brightness and tones before you go out to YouTube or something, where sometimes if it's too bright or too vibrant or too dark, you're just losing some of the detail or you're blowing out the detail. So this one is actually more useful than you'd imagine. Okay, so that's a little bit on Hue versus Luma. What's up, Gilbert? What's up, Per? How are you? Okay, very nice. All right, let's go ahead and move on to the next clip and talk about the next module here, which is Luma versus Sat. So by now you've probably figured out how to understand what these things all mean, right? It means you're adjusting the saturation now of a particular luminance value, right? Now, in this case, as we look at this shot, it's just very blown out and very, very flat. There's even a LUT already applied to this, but there was just so much white sky and the sun was obscured by the clouds that you weren't actually, the camera didn't seem to really capture, well, it did capture it, but displayed just with an input LUT, we're kind of not feeling that saturated warmth of the sun, just the brightness of that sun. So this is what we're going to do. We'll take our eyedropper, once again, make sure I've got the right clip selected, that's helpful. Hold on, let's undo that. Remember I mentioned this last week. All right, so we can take the eyedropper and make the selection in the yellow. You can actually see that I've already done it right here. And right away, what you're going to see is that it just saturates some of that bright, whitish yellow light, right? Just to give it a little more something. Again, here's the before, all right? Very flat, very blown out. Here's the after. Now, you might ask yourself, why wouldn't I have just done a hue versus sat, right? Adjust the saturation of a particular hue. Well, you can, and I think I may have done this for you already. The issue with doing that, and let me turn off Luma versus sat, all right? So remember, take a look at this shot here. Here, and actually I'm going to do this right side by side so you can kind of really get a glimpse of what's happening. When I enable what we just did with Luma versus sat, you're just seeing saturation of the brightness of the sun in the sky. We're not seeing any more yellow or warmth down here because that luminance is not on the ground down here. It only exists here, right? So the question was, well, why wouldn't you use hue versus sat, right? That way you just brighten the yellow, brighten the warmth. Isn't that going to do it? Well, yes, it will. The difference is, let me see if I can keep these in view. Oh, I can. How nice. All right. Love when we can scroll it like that. I took a sample in the same exact location right here with the eyedropper. Let's go ahead and turn on hue versus sat. Do you see what's happened? The ground now. You're picking up any of those warm yellow tones in the earth and the ground. Now they're more saturated. And because there's yellow in the green grass, that's more saturated. And because there's some yellow in this little building right here, that's more saturated. That isn't what I wanted to do. Now that may look nice, but that isn't what I was trying to achieve. All right, so there's the before and the after there. If we go back to Luma versus sat and turn this on, you can see it only affects this area. Where that luminance selection existed, that's the area where we're increasing, or of course you have the ability to decrease the saturation there. All right? Jason Rose, cause it will. Okay, so you're answering you're answering your questions right there. Very cool. All right. So you get the idea, right? So again, when we're doing hue versus sat, you're selecting that hue. So whatever that color, yellow or sort of whitish yellow is, wherever that exists in some form or another, you're increasing the saturation of all of that. Here, you're increasing the saturation of a brightness value of a certain color. And that brightness value only exists in the sky. It doesn't exist on the ground, which is currently in shadow. Make sense? All right. I'm telling you, it's one of these things. Before I got used to using Lumetri, I'd seen curves like this, and one, I didn't understand them, and two, I didn't know how to even describe how to do them because I was just like, well, forget it. I don't know. It's not going to do it. I can't do it. and I would just go to something like, we used to have, I think we might still have an effect called fast color, which is just very, very quick, you know, just saturate, contrast, brightness. And I was like, all right, there we go, done. Didn't think I was much of a color grading artist, but that was kind of my limitation at the time. So as long as you just feel comfortable in doing it, it's really super easy to make those changes. All right, what's up, Quinn? So good. Jan Erik, super, very powerful tools. Couldn't agree more. All right, so now we're going to move on to color wheels and match. So this is now the fourth module inside of Lumetri. We've covered basic, covered creative, covered curves. Now we're going to go to color wheels and match. All right, so first and foremost, before we even do anything, color wheels and match is if you are someone who, one, already understands color theory, you studied this in design school, you studied this wherever. If you already know this, this is kind of the classic way of performing color timing, color correction, where you have your 3 discrete color wheels affecting shadows, midtones, and highlights, and then you have additional controls for the contrast of each of those bands, okay? This is, by itself, pretty complex if you don't know what you're doing. And in terms of, again, as I just mentioned before, we used to have, I think it may still be here, the 3-way color corrector. This was sort of the foundational basis of working in 3-way color. This was kind of a standard thing, certainly in the older version of Premiere. To this day, working with shadows, midtones, and highlights, if I had to grade something only using those 3 wheels, I'd still be grading the shot that we worked on last week because I don't know. I'm just not very good at it, and I'm certainly not fast at it. And you really kind of you need to know what you're doing to manually begin working with these 3 color wheels. But I'm going to show you a way using Sensei technology, which is our AI machine learning tech that we have inside of pretty much all of our Adobe CC apps now, which allows you to match the look from different shots, from other cameras, even from reference images, stills or moving, to, if it doesn't automatically create the same exact look that you're going for, it's going to get you most of the way there, and then you can manually tweak highlight, midtone, shadows, and contrast, and in doing so, it's going to teach you how each of these things works, how they all work together. Fantastic. Okay, so there's 2 main reasons why you would use color matching. In the case of something like we have here, and I'm going to go into our comparison view mode. All right, now this is what the comparison view button looks like. You'll note that there is also a comparison view button directly in color wheels and match in case you don't have this button already docked inside your program monitor. Remember, if you want to add it, you just go to the button editor, which is that little plus sign right here, click on that, and drag this icon down into your button panel, okay? But we can access it right now from comparison view right here. All right, so in this particular shot, now here's actually, this is one that we graded last week, as you may recall. Here we have 2 shots. Now, typically this would be, the same point in time if it was multicam, but it doesn't matter because it's the same point in time, maybe seconds apart, shot with different cameras. So a really common need for color matching is, you shoot something with an iPhone, and then you shoot something with a mirrorless camera, or you shoot something with an area or a red, and even after you add LUTs and kind of get them to their baseline look, they don't look the same, right? Sometimes, even between an iPhone 11 and an iPhone 8, the image is not going to look the same. And if you want to look pro, and this is something which a lot of people talk about with producing YouTube videos, audio is definitely at the top, right? Bad audio immediately turns people off. But having consistent color across, cuts, especially if you're doing a multicam, is really important. If you cut to one shot and, you've got lovely balanced skin tone and cut to another and you're sort of gray or green or magenta, it just doesn't look very polished. So color match allows you to do this for matching shots beautifully. So when you enter comparison view, you'll see that it shows you the reference on the left. Now, by the way, you have a RealTime Scrubber here. So you can scrub through whatever camera, whatever shot you're trying to match to. And I'll just show you. If I grab this you'll see it's real time. It's moving through. So, there's, again, this is the shot that we worked on last week. Okay. We could match it against this particular one, but I want to go for this time of day right here because this is where, again, this is the same exact scene. These are just a couple of seconds apart here. All right. So, so the reference shot is on the left. The current shot that we want to match is on the right. Now, by the way, if you are so inclined, you'll see we have a little swap sides button here. So you can flip those. If you like to see the reference on the right and the one that you're trying to match on the left, you can do that. Incidentally, the one on the left is what you're seeing with your current time indicator here, your playhead, or your playhead right here. That's what that's referencing, okay? So how does it work? Well, it's very simple. We're going to come up to Apply, Match, click it. Sensei will analyze your clips, and just like that, it's going to get you, if not all the way there, most of the way there. Now, as I'm looking at this, it's pretty darn close, right? But the highlights, and again, I know this just from having done it a while, the highlights are a little off. They need to be a little bit cooler. There's a little bit too much warmth in the highlights, in that sky, okay? So I'm going to take the highlight wheel here, and I'm just going to start to pull this towards the blue and maybe even a little bit of magenta there, okay? And now I think we're getting somewhere, all right? Now this is where this tool becomes really, really essential. So down in the bottom center of the comparison view, you have 3 buttons here, side by side. So this is the view that we're currently in. But you can also split screen the reference and the current shot vertically or horizontally to compare how good the match did. So let's go ahead and do a horizontal split. And I love doing this because you've got the sun in there. So even though the shot is kind of, obviously very different angles, look at the sky. Look at the gradient. Look at the bleed through the bottom. It feels like the same thing. Like right now, okay, I'm cutting off his head, but do you see it? If you didn't have that divider there, that sky looks continuous, meaning it's matched. We did it. Now you might say, well, I don't know how close it is. It's pretty close to begin with. Was it? Let's disable it. Oh, look at that. So that's where we started, right? You're going, oh, yeah, not close at all. Oh, that's damn close, right? Very cool. And you can, again, you can run the separator here. You can, do it however you like to get that match as close as possible. Here's a vertical look at it. The vertical is not quite as dramatic here, but even as you look at the ocean, all right, the hues in the ocean right there. Now maybe we want to warm up the midtones ever so slightly. If we wanted to do that, again, I could grab it over here. Maybe warm up those midtones a little. I don't even think it needs that. I don't think it needs it. And I can see like, all right, maybe the contrast needs a little bit of adjustment, but I don't think so. I think it's right on. Side by side, again, before, after. So the idea here is that if we were cutting between these shots, right, it's going to feel the same. It's going to look the same. And this horizontal really sells the idea here that we've now matched these quite wonderfully in seconds. Something that honestly would have taken me such an enormous amount of time to do manually, you can do with a single click. And this is through the power of machine learning, AI, and Adobe Sensei. All right? So color matching for matching shots between different cameras. Super common use for vloggers, for YouTubers, and for anyone who shoots any kind of pro video, because no 2 cameras are going to look exactly alike. All right. Now, you also have a case where you want simply to match the look of your shot to, say, your favorite movie, or perhaps your favorite movie poster or something like that. So I've got 3 kind of very extreme examples here just to show you again how Sensei can get you most of the way there, especially if you're struggling manually. Okay, so let's go ahead and start. So I want to be, what is this, around 40 seconds. I'm going to scrub through here where I've got a couple of reference stills. You'll recognize some of them here. So this is, again, I don't own this image at all. This was pulled off one of the PR sites for Blade Runner 2049. We've got Harrison Ford there and Ryan, I just lost his name. Someone say it in the chat. You know who I'm talking about. Okay. we want to go for this kind of, 2049 super cool look. And these shots aren't too different, but again, this one is clearly very, very warm. This one really has that cool blue look to it. And Ryan Gosling, thank you, Jan Eric. And I could probably do this one manually, but let me get Sensei to help me, right? Now, you'll notice that there is a checkbox here, which we didn't use before, that says face detection, right? So what this does is this specifically uses Sensei to analyze skin tone. And for anyone who becomes a pro in grading, this is kind of their calling card, because skin tone, and all photographers know this too, it's challenging, right? Especially in less than ideal lighting, or again, if you're trying to match to something else, skin tone can be hard. So it's using skin tone to really analyze the presence of faces in your reference shot and apply that to the skin tones in your current shot. So with face detection selected, let's go ahead and click on Apply Match. It analyzes. I did the same thing again where I kept the wrong clip selected. We really need to make that better. I mean, I've done it twice already. What's my excuse? I work here. Okay. Make sure your clip is selected. Face detection. All right. And let's see, is this all reset? Got to reset all this. It looks like it's reset. Hold on. Let me make sure that this isn't... Oh, I've already got some stuff in here. Okay, I was going to say, this didn't look totally fresh. By the way, double-clicking inside of the wheels and all of these things here, contrast, this will reset all of it. Okay, so now we're back to square one. Face detection, reference on the left, current shot on the right, apply match, analyzing happens, and just like that, we get that much closer. Now, again, as I'm looking at skin tone, it's pretty good. I think I want to move probably some of those highlights again, because as I look in our reference shot here, there's a lot of that purple magenta. There's some of it here, but I think we can do a bit more because you've got all these natural kind of light leaks and lens flares happening there. So if I pull some of those highlights a little bit more towards the blue magenta, now it starts to feel like we're working in the same space. And look here. I mean, again, now there's more brightness, there's more luminance in Ryan Gosling's face because of how it was lit. Her face is in shadow. We can't fix that. But look at the tone of the sky. Look at the tones of the blue here, the cyan. Very, very similar, right? I mean, it doesn't feel dissimilar looking at this shot. What was the original? Not even close, right? Like, you are not even in the ballpark, not going to fool anybody. Oh, yeah, that looks kind of legit, right? And notice here we're using the vertical split. Again, we can do the horizontal. This one, again, not quite as dramatic because the tones aren't in the right space. So it largely depends on the shot. Here, where we can see blue in the corners and the extremes, this is a good way to make those comparisons. But in just a second, we did a really wonderful job of kind of zeroing in on where this needed to be to get it pretty close, okay? Let's reset this again. Again, just double-clicking inside of our tone wheels. And let's go to another stylized shot here, another Blade Runner. Again, now this one has a much more pinkish magenta kind of look. We've got faces here. Let's once again do Apply Match. Take some water. All right. And you're like, well, isn't that just like a magenta filter? Well, no, because again, it's really analyzing face, tone, hue. Here, that's pretty decent with the horizontal. Again, as we look at these side by side, obviously the luminance in the face. Now, we could use a little bit of Luma, hue versus Luma here to brighten the luminance in the face via the curves if we wanted to, right? That's the benefit, of course. But it gets us there very, very quickly, all right? And for the last example here, I thought this would be fun because this is something which is something that you see all the time in grading, which is that sort of orange and teal, like classic movie poster. And once again, I just happened to pick a Harrison Ford one here. This is from Cowboys and Aliens, all right? So this one, as you look at them side by side, they're not super far off. But again, I'm not skilled enough to just kind of dial that in. So I'm going to click on Apply Match. All right. Just like that. And now we're pretty darn close. Now, here's a great example of where, as I'm looking at this, you know, one of the things that I'm thinking is, okay, well, first of all, just to really sell it, I think the orange is pretty good, but there just wasn't enough blue in the sky to begin with. So we can do this a number of different ways. First, we can do a little hue versus sat to just saturate the native color right there. And then I'm going to come into hue versus hue and take that native color and adjust it to the proper blue. It's going to be about that. Okay. Let's increase it a little bit more. Okay. And then if I were to take something like hue versus Luma, again, adjust the luminance value. Let's come down here and maybe darken this a little bit. Okay, again, this is a proxy, right? So I'm pretty happy with that, actually. And if I came out to our master curve here, maybe just add a little bit more shadow contrast there, make that pop a little bit. All right. We could even do a little additional saturation. That's too much. Right about there. Okay. And now, before, after. Okay. Clearly blue, clearly orange, orange in the skin tone. Again, a little side by side. You know, there's a familiarity here, right? This is another one where maybe the vertical's pretty good. Yeah. Okay. Now, obviously, we could take this more extreme. We could really work on, you know, the orange in the hair and in the skin tone to really make that pop out. And, you know, adding a little bit of red in there would help as well. But even as we do this horizontal divider, it just works. It just looks really nice. Okay. Super cool. Love it. All right. Okay, just looking at the chats here. All right, anything? Thank you, Jan Eric there. Jan Eric, is there a limit to how far you can push your footage for a look that wasn't originally there? You know, that's a great question. So the truth is, you know, the limitation is going to be in effectively the codec that was used to capture that footage and what bit depth it was captured in. So in the case of iPhone, where you know you've got a lot of pixels, but you're still capturing 8-bit footage, 420. The best way to think of it is in photography terms. If your master image is a JPEG, you can certainly colorize it really and take it to extremes. But at some point, you're just going to hit that. You're going to hit a limitation because you're going to start to see artifacting. I mean, that's basically that's the issue. Now, with some images, if it wasn't captured at the center, at the sensor, if it wasn't captured at the sensor in the camera, yes, there's only so much you can do. But it's a matter of experimentation at that point. So, you know, you can push anything to an extreme, but, you know, if you had something that was just completely desaturated, are you going to be able to make it pop simply by using color controls only? Maybe not. Now, that's an example. That's an area where you might take it a step further and start using things like color gradients to really overlay, intense blue and intense teal or orange, you know, at the extremes, and use blend modes to add color solids over top to increase, you know, the contrast and sort of the color density. It's really just a matter of the footage that you have. Obviously, if you shoot on, 12-bit, 14-bit footage, raw footage, red, airy, BMCC, whatever it is, you've just got more latitude. Hopefully, if it's exposed properly, you've got more of that information just sitting there. You've just got more room to play. But the only trade-off is it'll just look more artifacted if you push it too far. Okay. Nice. Quinn Stevenson, I wish I could match without the reference clip on the timeline. Yes, and I know, Quinn, that is a common request. I highly recommend going to our user voice for Premiere. I believe there's already a user voice request to make that like just be able to match it from the project panel or something like that so that it doesn't have to live in the timeline. We hear that a lot, and it would be nice to have. Okay? Very cool. All right, Per, when you shoot flat, Sony, should you shoot 1 to 2 stops overexposed before you use that S-Log3 LUT? Per, you know, I've definitely heard some. I don't shoot Sony myself, and I know there's just from a lot of my friends who do and who have struggled and now are better with S-Log, that they've been shooting with it for a while. That's typically what I've heard. Again, because you can push it that way on the A7 series. Yes, no. I mean, for my money, honestly, I don't shoot things. I'm always a little scared about shooting stuff overexposed, even if it's 1 or 2 stops. But that's a technique I've heard, and yes, it can certainly. And then you apply the appropriate LUT, and you're still going to have all that latitude to work with. I think it largely also depends on if you're using natural light versus studio light in that case. But that's definitely something that I've heard people recommend. All right. Jason Rose, just add J.J. Abrams' lens flare to cover stuff up. So true. And there are a lot of those lens flares out there, and they do, in fact, work wonders. They can save a lot of things. Okay. All right. So now we've done basic, creative, curves, color wheels, and match. Now we're going to move on to HSL Secondaries. And as mentioned before, lots of different reasons that you use HSL Secondaries, also known as doing secondary color correction. Now, the traditional way that you would have used secondary color was something that we had previously in Premiere, found in a 3-way color corrector. So the concept would typically be you grade the overall shot, right? Which, again, you would do in basic correction, creative, curves, color wheels. When you get to secondaries, this now allows you to target specific color ranges and then affect the hue, saturation, luminance of those color ranges, as well as the ability to refine and, denoise a specific color range, blur a specific color range, and then affect multiple controls, including temperature tint, contrast, sharpening, and saturation. And I have 3 different examples here to showcase. A really common way of doing this is to target things like skin tone, right? Now, again, we showed this with hue versus sat. You can still do it with hue versus sat. Remember, though, that hue versus sat is looking at that very specific hue. It's just a different way to think about it, and there's different ways that you can leverage this. You'll see as I'm showing you here and why you might use this particular command for something like skin tone or for matching colors for certain objects or sky replacement, which is a little trickier with hue versus sat. All right, so first let's just focus on skin tone here. So this is a video that I shot in Egypt, in Giza, about 10 or so years ago. And this was done with a Canon 7D, so this is 1080p, 24 frame per second. And I just wanted to just warm up the skin tone a bit. This was shot fairly flat, as you can see. The nice thing is, throughout Egypt, I mean, there's just so much, just the landscape and the clothing and the design, just everything. There's saturation everywhere. So this was a good example of shooting a bit flat because I knew I was going to add color back in. But the skin tone wasn't quite doing what I wanted. So this is really simple to leverage here, and you've got lots of different ways to do it. Again, I think the easiest and the intro way that I like to showcase is to leverage those classic Adobe eyedroppers. So we've got our clip selected here. I'm going to take my eyedropper, and I'm going to look for kind of a neutral a neutral depiction of skin tone and make a selection. All right. And when I do that, now you'll see that it has automatically adjusted the hue, right, the saturation, and the luminance sliders to represent that specific tone. All right. Now, if I click on this checkbox here that says next to color gray, you also have color black and white black. What you're seeing now is the area that's representing that sort of orange skin tone. That's the area that's being covered by the selection, okay? So obviously we're missing some because skin tone, it's gradient, right? I mean, if you're not wearing a lot of makeup, which I do on stage, yes, your skin tone is a bit uneven. So we need to add some selections to that. So you can do it in a couple of different ways. I can simply come over here, take the plus eyedropper, Now remember, it didn't quite get his cheek right here. So I'll make a selection there. And you can, what you just noticed is that it adjusted the hue width, the saturation width, and the luminance. You can also just keep this on and start clicking into the different sections to add more and more regions. Now, obviously, why isn't it getting here? Well, this is all of his hair, right? This is his beard. It's, we're getting some of it in the lips. That's okay. These really dark sections of the ears, do we need that? Maybe. I don't know if that's going to be so necessary. Again, now I'm going to show you how to adjust these manually in a second too. You can always undo them. If we select inside of here, now that may have been a bit too much, but let's see. So now it has adjusted all of the representative tones of the skin tones here by those HSL sliders. So now I can use the correction. All right, now we're not going to touch HSL for a second. You can use that in the next example here. So if I simply want to warm this up, now you can use the correction wheels here. And by the way, you have the ability here. This would be like mid-tone correction if you use this one by itself, or you have three-way ability here. Three-way color, shadows, mid-tone, and highlight. In this case, real simple. I'm just going to warm it up with the temperature control here. Not going too extreme, right? Now, if we go too extreme, it's just going to start to look weird. We'll do around 17%. Come up to contrast. Add a little bit of contrast here. Okay. And this is a good time, I think, for this to also introduce the native vignette. And that's the final module of Lumetri here. So if I click on Vignette, this is the exact same vignette that you have in Camera Raw, in Lightroom. And I'm simply going to add a little bit of cinematic drama via the vignette. All right? And I'm going to play this back for you too. Now you might think, okay, yeah, that looks pretty cool. Didn't it kind of look like that before? All right. Before, again, it's just good, but a little subtle, not quite popping. And after, very warm. Very lovely, very broadcast-like. Before, after, okay? We can even take it a little bit, maybe even adjust temp a little bit more. Now we're getting a little spray tan there. That actually looks okay. And play it back. All right? Pretty slick. Now you can just see, if you notice, you're seeing a couple little flickers there. That was before I was shooting with a non-fixed aperture lens. All right, if we wind back, you'll see these little flashes as I'm adjusting the zoom level there, okay? Really nice. Before, after. Before, after. All right? Now, what's really key about this, again, is that it's really only affecting his skin tones, right? Now, there may be some other representative close colors in the shot that it may pick up upon, right? And if it finds any of those, like maybe, again, these skin tones are similar, so by warming those up, it's okay. There's something we're getting a little bit of that right there. You can always take the minus eyedropper and select that, and you see it takes it out, right? Just the same way as it works in Photoshop, okay? And again, still looks pretty good. And we can just, let's undo that change, all right? And redo the change, you get the idea. Real simple, real easy. So you have a lot of flexibility here when working with the eyedropper selectors. Okay, let's go to another example where now we're going to leverage doing a bit of the selection of the HSL manually. Okay, so this was a shot done in Amsterdam for a piece that I did a while back called Jace's Travel Places. It was actually meant to be a travel series. I did two, one in the Netherlands and one in Japan, and we shot a couple others, but it just, time. And on this particular day, now this was shot with, I think, a Canon C100. The sky just wasn't all that blue. And if you live in the Netherlands, you know that, when it's blue sky, it's the most beautiful blue sky. But a lot of times it is kind of somewhat monochromatic here. And just to point out, I've already got my Canon C-Log input LUT already applied here. So this is actually what the shot looks like. Now, it's not bad, but it's just not quite blue enough, all right? So let's go ahead and bring out a bit more of that blue. Now, this is also another technique that I've shown, and if you go to my YouTube channel, you'll see I have, and it's also on the Premiere Pro Facebook, I have a whole tutorial on sky replacement, which is a lot of people do via masking and roto brush inside of After Effects. You can also use HSL Secondaries for just basic sky replacement. So there was another shot that I did in Egypt where the sky was just blown out white. I just want to turn the sky blue. You can use this technique to do it, and that's what we're going to do here, all right? So once again, we want to make this sky just overall more blue. Let's take my eyedropper and click, in this case, in really the darkest blue, which is right up here in the corner, okay, to get my selection. Now, when I turn on the color in gray, what you're seeing is because there is a gradient, a natural gradient in the sky, we're not getting anything but that top corner. So this is where now we're going to adjust different parameters of HSL. Now, I don't always know which one it is, so I have to play around a bit, all right? But just to show you how these work. So you'll notice that there's two triangles contained on each of these HSL controls. The top triangle controls range of the hue, and you can see that it's not really doing anything. So that's obviously not the one we need to affect. The bottom triangle adjusts the feathering, okay? The feathering of the selected hue, the feathering of the saturation, the feathering of the selected luminance value, all right? Same with saturation here, okay? Now you can see as I'm adjusting the saturation, we're starting to get in some of the outline of the building there, but obviously that's not the one we need either. It's luminance, right? And that makes sense because it's the brightness, the brighter, whiter areas of that blue sky that just appeared white to the camera sensor where we need to fill it in. So I'm going to take this top triangle under the luminance slider here, and you'll see that I'm able to bring that back in. Now you might be noticing we're starting to pick up some of that on the building here. Yes, because that's glass, and because to the eye, that blue sky is reflecting into the glass. So it makes sense, right? And you can see as I adjust the saturation here, the feathering, now it's really too much. So, we can pull it all the way back. Maybe that's a little too extreme. Ever so slight amount of feathering there. Notice it's totally ignoring that tree branch in the foreground. Wonderful, okay? Now again, could we have done this with the eyedroppers, making multiple selections instead of pulling apart the HSL controls? Absolutely. Just showing you what they do. Top triangle is the range of the selected parameter. Bottom triangle is the feather. And you even get a nice visual indication when you're doing that of the feathering there, right? You can really see how nicely that's working, all right? So we can turn this back off. And once again, a real simple way to just kind of repair or replace a sky. Let's go towards some blue. This might be another opportunity to use a little bit of a vignette if we wanted. And just like that, we took that and became that. That to that. And there still is a little bit of a gradient there, right? You can see the brightness changes, especially as the camera pans. Yeah, that's natural light refracting and reflecting as expected, okay? But this just makes it super, super easy to do little subtle tweaks. And then, of course, if we want to pump it up even more, could you use the hue versus sat curve? Yes. Could you have done hue versus sat in the first place? Yes, except that because this was so flat, you'd be increasing saturation. Look, this hue here is almost the same as this stone hue here. So you'd be picking up all of those hues and saturating them. That's not what we wanted. We really wanted to focus on this sky. And that color, it was captured in the camera. Just the delivery, we just weren't seeing it until we brought some of that out, okay? And that's kind of one of the things that you're really going to see when you shoot with something like, again, a Sony or a Blackmagic Pocket Cinema or Arri or, anything that's shooting really beyond 8-bit. Not that 8-bit can't capture that, but you're going to see a little bit more flexibility and a little bit more detail with the greater than 8-bit capture, okay? Cool. All right. Looking back over here in the comments, okay. All right. Abdel, does this workflow work with 360 video in VR mode? Absolutely. Absolutely. So yes, all of the Lumetri color applies in monoscopic, stereoscopic, 3D, VR, 360, it all effectively functions the same. Now, of course, with 360, there's other considerations when grading and things, and using effects because of some of the softness and things that you tend to get around the stitch edges. But in theory, what you're seeing, it all functions and works exactly the same. Okay. All right, last example. We've got 5 more minutes here, which is great. I'm going to end on time today. I'm glad I timed this all and got it all in as expected. Last one here. This is really just using HSL to just, again, change a color and then apply that to multiple clips that have that same present color. Could you do this with hue versus sat? Or sorry, hue versus hue? Yes, probably. You get a little bit more greater detailed control over the mask that you're building. And that's really what, when this set color control, that's what this is. You're basically building a mask, right? A color mask, and then refining that color mask accurately. It's just a little bit more rough to do it with hue versus hue, which is why that's really more of a, it's just, you just have more refined control doing it this way. The brilliant thing is you've always got multiple ways of doing things in Premiere. So here we just simply want to recolor the jacket. So I will once again make sure my clip is selected, take my eyedropper here, and because we've got, once again, sort of a gradient in the pink here, let's make our selection, go into our color gray, all right, adjust the saturation here, adjust luminance, all right, and note that, you know, we're not picking up any of the adjacent colors, obviously. Feather the saturation a little bit here, all right, and we don't want to get it on his hands, so I got to get right to the edge there. Maybe feather some of the luminance, like that. Looks to be pretty good. All right, now again, we could use our correction wheel here. Pull this into the purple. Pull it into the orange. Yellow. You get the idea. Desaturate the whole thing, right? Lots of different ways to do this. Since we didn't come here, let's go here. Wow, that's really, really vibrant. Okay. So let's go to something like this, where we wanted it a bit more orange and less pink. So again, the before, decidedly pinkish. The after, I don't know what you'd call this, salmon-ish, all right? And maybe we even blur it to soften it a little bit, okay? Soften our selection there, all right? Play this back. Looks pretty slick. Okay. Now, as I showed you last week, what if I had a bunch of shots where I just wanted to be able to take them, and I don't want to mess about with their overall grade, but I want to apply this secondary change to anywhere that color exists, right? That particular original pink. So I'm going to right-click here and choose Copy. Let's come over to this shot where, again, here is our character in the rain. Right-click, Paste Attributes. It'll paste the Lumetri color effect, but again, the only module that we've leveraged here is HSL Secondary. Click OK, and it applies it. Now, because he's in shadow, because it's a little bit different, you know, this is, again, just an edge case here. I may have to come in and select a little bit more of the jacket manually, all right? But you can see that as I make the selection, that's what's so cool. The color itself is applying exactly the same way. And because he's a bit more in shadow, we may need to desaturate so it's not quite so dramatic, right? So there you go. So now if we kind of segue between these two, we'll probably desaturate that one a little bit as well, right? Now they're really the same. Super cool, right? So easy. So wonderful. Now, we used to get asked all the time, can you do multiple secondaries? That's a typical process. Well, you can, but not in the same Lumetri layer. This is where you would come up to the top, as we showed last week, and you would create a new Lumetri effect and just use the HSL module to do another secondary grade on something else in the shot, okay? And if you want more detail on that, you can just go back to last week's broadcast, and I showed you how to create the layers and how those work, all right? Super cool. And then the last thing that I'm going to show you here is just using an adjustment layer to affect the overall grade of everything. So down at the bottom of the project panel here, wait, I'm just going to hide my, let me hide my camera for a second. All right, I've got less than a minute to go. Down at the bottom of the project panel here, I'm going to choose adjustment layer. It comes in the right size. I'm going to take this adjustment layer and drag it over everything like this. Turn the camera back on. Okay. And now when I select the adjustment layer, what this is going to allow me to do is say apply an overall look to everything. So this is where if I wanted to use one of our LUTs, something like this, right? Just real simple. It's now applied this film style LUT to that shot, to this shot, and to that shot to give everything an overall look, an overall grade, an overall tone. And of course, this is all fully editable. You can see these are a bit extreme, so maybe we drop the intensity here, right? But really, things are starting to pop now, and this is how you really finish the look of your production. After you individually grade, you drag that adjustment layer in, and you do some more magic, and it just kind of glues everything together. All right, everyone. Well, thank you so much for watching. Again, my name is Jason Levine. Coming up next, we've got Howard, who's going to do some incredible stuff in Adobe XD. The Adobe XD Creative Challenge is next. So thanks so much for watching. Have a great rest of your morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are in the world, and we'll see you again next time. Take care. Bye-bye.